Okay.
Okay, Jackie. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for attending. Oh, one sec. Let me just figure. There we go. I am not the most well-versed in doing online presentations, so just bear with me. And sometimes I get a little nervous, so I will try and speak clearly and slowly. So again, thanks for coming. This is a topic that's like near and dear to my heart. Um, as I am a naturopath and also a mom of a childhood cancer survivor. Um, Before I get started, my oldest was like, "Your presentation needs more pizzazz." So he was the one who told me to put that thumbs up there. So he was like, "You have to share that." um, so just to kind of go over what I'll be sharing today, I'll tell you a little bit about our story, then go over sort of the importance of nutrition as far as helping your child thrive through cancer treatment and beyond. We'll go through some of the common challenges that kids face with regards to their nutrition, as well as some of the challenges you might be facing as a caregiver. And then we'll go over some general nutrition guidelines for kids and some of my favorite, like kid-friendly superfoods, some things to avoid, some of my practical tips, and then, as Sarai said, we'll have time at the end for Q&A. So this is my son, Spencer. He was diagnosed at 13 months with B-cell ALL, high risk. Um, and we actually just completed our 2.5 years of chemotherapy last week. He had his port removed on Thursday. So this is all very recent as far as what we've been dealing with and, how relevant this journey has been as far as like our current experience. In fact, like we're still living it. We're probably never going to stop paying really close attention to his nutrition and, wanting to focus on prevention now and making sure that his body is strong and resilient now that he's completed treatment. So for leukemia, we had to do the 2.5 years of chemotherapy. That included 20 plus lumbar punctures where they gave chemo into his cerebrospinal fluid. We live in Prince Edward County. Prior to 2020, I was living in Toronto. So our treatment was completed at KGH in Kingston, where we had like several hospitalizations. I'm sure families are familiar with that. But he came into hospital in quite critical condition. And so that was a big part of our first few months of treatment, was just sort of dividing and conquering between my husband and I. We have 3 boys in total. So, and we didn't have our family close by because we had left the city. So, yeah, it was a lot. And I'm sure everybody has their story of why, treatment can be so overwhelming in so many different ways. So navigating conventional treatment while integrating naturopathic and holistic modalities was a top priority for our family. In fact, it was one of the, biggest things that I was concerned about when we received his diagnosis was like, how are we going to do this? I was afraid of chemo. And yeah, that just sort of became my mission, was trying to understand how we could best support him through what I considered to be really, harsh and scary medicines. Um, yeah, and so as I said, he came into hospital urgently with it by ambulance. So he's truly gone from surviving to thriving today. He's now 3.5. So here we are. I am a naturopathic doctor by choice and a momcologist by fate, I guess. I graduated in 2010, and just in case people aren't familiar, naturopathic doctors are regulated primary healthcare providers in Ontario. My practice has always focused on moms and kids, pregnancy. I was a doula for many years, as well as like I have a strong focus on emotional well-being and, helping people manage their stress as it relates to their physical body and well-being. So some of what I experienced firsthand was the limitations of hospital-based or conventional nutrition strategies. I might say, if I was being really honest, I was actually quite disappointed, I guess, by some of the nutritional advice that we received from the hospital dietitian, more so just because my understanding of the body and holistic nutrition is so different, I think, than what, a conventional doctor or oncologist might have as part of their training. And I really just felt like the advice sort of fell short as far as how much more there that could be done for helping these kids to, really support their bodies through chemo and radiation. I've also experienced some of the practical challenges of feeding an unwell child. I will say that I was so blessed that because my son was still a baby, I was still nursing, and I'm actually still nursing to this day. That was a really huge supportive thing that we had in our favor, I think, um, because my goal was really to try and minimize and avoid supportive medications wherever possible. So, we use things like Zofran or ondansetron for chemotherapy days, just to help with nausea. Um, but for pretty much everything else, we were able to really manage all treatment side effects naturally. And I should say, not just because of nursing, but because of using nutritional strategies and other holistic modalities like homeopathy and herbs and supplements. So I won't be talking so much about those modalities today. We'll really be focused on nutrition. And the reason I think this is so important and impactful for us as families is because nutrition isn't going to interact with chemo and radiation. I know that um, as far as our own experience went, if I was going to bring up, potentially supplements or things that I wanted to incorporate into our treatment plan, that, sometimes came up with resistance with the oncology team or the pharmacist who didn't maybe have much experience with those things. Whereas nutrition, because it doesn't really interact, you have a lot of flexibility, and you can incorporate a lot of beneficial changes. So I think this is a huge area where we can make a big difference for our kids. So I believe nutrition is essential to all kids in general, right? But especially during cancer treatment. So nutrition supports growth and development. Children we know need lots of nutrition just to grow and develop normally, but even more so when they're fighting illness and their body is under stress. Nutrition boosts their immune system. We can give them nutrient-dense foods to help strengthen their immune systems, make it easier for them to fight infections and recover from treatments. I know that was something that we experienced several times during our journey, especially in the first year. My son was often neutropenic, and some of our hospitalizations for fevers required antibiotics. And so, yeah, just trying to make sure that he was getting as much nutrient-dense food was really important, which can be a challenge in the hospital system in general. Nutrition improves energy and strength. So calories and protein support energy levels and muscle strength. This will help our kids stay active and engaged in their daily activities, which is so important to sort of their mental, emotional well-being during a cancer journey. We can manage our side effects. So good nutrition can ease side effects like the nausea, appetite, and taste change, and can also help our kids tolerate their treatments better. And enhancing quality of life. So there's a saying in sort of the nutrition world that food equals mood. So basically, the quality of your food can have a major impact on how you're actually feeling, mentally or emotionally. Proper nutrition can reduce fatigue, help kids feel more like themselves, and just generally make a challenging time a little bit easier. So I wanted to chat about some of the common nutritional challenges that we might be facing with kids who are undergoing cancer treatment. So, as I just mentioned, some of the treatment side effects that are common are nausea, appetite loss, fatigue, and constipation. So, obviously, that can really impact, how much a child is able to actually take in orally, whether they're vomiting. This can throw off their electrolyte balance. Um, they can become dehydrated. So that can be a huge challenge. Your child might be experiencing weight loss due to just a general caloric deficit, and muscle loss, or protein, which is also called cachexia, which is also very common. We can help to support our kids by providing them with more protein. Um, Taste bud changes is another really common one. So some chemotherapy drugs we know can actually alter the way our children perceive tastes. So that can be a result of like damaged taste buds. Some drugs will alter their sense of smell. Sometimes it'll have an effect on their saliva. They may not be able to produce as much or have a really dry mouth, which can impact their desire to eat or ability to break down foods. And some meds can also cause a bitter or metallic taste in their mouth, which again can just make the process of eating unpleasant or, make them turn away from some of their favorite go-tos. Another factor would be nutrient depletions, as far as their like overall nutrition. So I have a slide later in the presentation where I cover a few of the, medication, chemotherapy drugs and some of the known nutrient depletions that they cause. But this can become an issue. Some of the side effects can actually be mitigated by providing our kids with some of those nutrients that either are directly being impacted by the chemo or again, because they're just not getting enough of them in their diet. Mucositis is another big concern with kids on chemo and in radiation, where painful lesions can develop in their mouth or anywhere in their digestive tract, which just makes the process of eating really painful, and can cause, down the line issues with their digestion as well. They might be experiencing diarrhea, constipation, as a result of just damage to their gut lining. And then something that's a little bit more like in the holistic world of health or naturopathically, we think about the liver as one of our organs of detoxification. And of course, conventional medicine understands it as that as well. And they'll be looking at liver enzymes to see how well of the body's tolerating treatment. But as far as me as a naturopath, I think of the liver, its role in our body is to process toxins. So when our child is working through processing toxic treatments, the liver can become sort of overburdened, and that can just contribute to generally feeling unwell and crappy. So then there's the challenges that we might be facing as well as caregivers. So, mood and our child's emotional state. If our child is not feeling well, they're in a bad mood, they're angry, they're sad, that can be a barrier to meal times or wanting to eat. Um, I know food as comfort is something that many of us are probably like relate to in general, just as regular day-to-day life. Um, but I think, this is something where we might use food to sort of alleviate a bad day or offer something that, gives the child sort of that feeling of um, regularity or comfort, or even just providing a treat because it makes them feel better in that moment. But sometimes those foods aren't necessarily the best. Kids, as we know, probably don't necessarily have as much of a sense of like what's healthy for them, that they need to like override their desires in favor of like eating something healthy. They might, have their go-to foods that just make them feel good. I think sense of control and power struggles can also be an issue. I think I'm dealing with that right now with a 3.5-year-old, just as regular, child parent power struggles. But I think when our kids are going through something as huge as a cancer journey, they've lost a lot of control over other areas of their life. Like they're maybe lost their day-to-day routine, going to school, some of their extracurriculars. So um, having that sense of control can lead to issues with, caregivers wanting them to eat certain things. They may be resistant. I know some of the questions that were sent in were related to picky eating and preferences and how those can last beyond treatment, for sure. I think that's a big one that we face. Um, as I mentioned in the previous slide, even like the taste bud changes, that can really exacerbate typical, childhood picky eating into a much bigger issue. I think fear is another big one. I know that for myself, this was something that caused me a lot of stress, like seeing my baby go from being, healthy and chubby to losing 10 pounds, and being scrawny. it's easy to sort of like be very reactionary when you're in that state of just wanting your child to gain some weight. So that can sort of like put a little bit of like pressure into, your decisions about what they're eating and maybe like cause you not to care as much. I know I was in some of those moments myself for sure. And then again, pressure from the oncology team might be also like a driver for making certain nutritional choices. If they're seeing, your child losing weight or some of the muscle tissue is disappearing, then that can be sort of one of those conversations that again just feeds into more of a fear-based approach to diet. And one thing, I don't know if I might have put this into the presentation somewhere else, but early on in our treatment, I remember receiving like a handout from our nutritionist, and it had some sample recipes in it. And some of the things that I saw in there were actually kind of horrifying, like suggestions to add ice cream to smoothies or canola oil just for sheer caloric value. Really not thinking about things in like from a nutritional or nutrient dense standpoint at all. So, but I know that at the time too, the intentions were definitely good, but I felt that pressure there to just feed at whatever cost. Kind of tying into the same thing as food as comfort. Sometimes we just want to give our kids something that they can have to make them feel better. And then another huge challenge might be that, you're in the hospital for long treatment days, you don't have access to foods, you're bringing things that are more convenient. You might be living in the hospital for days at a time or altogether living away from home. So, just one tip that I thought of that, I know people are always asking how they can help your family, especially in the beginning, and it can be very overwhelming. But one thing that I found and realized was some of the most valuable gifts and offers were things like Meal Train, where families were bringing us home cooked meals. That was so, so huge. And then the other thing that I learned to kind of request was grocery or meal delivery gift cards. So things like Skip the Dishes or Uber Eats. And I definitely took advantage of those when we were in hospital, to be able to kind of supplement like the hospital diet and be able to make choices around, things that might be healthier takeout options in the community. So some of the key nutritional focus areas during treatment, you've probably heard the term macronutrients or macros. This is carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So carbohydrates provide us with energy. Ideally, we want to obtain them from whole food sources like fruits and vegetables, as well as whole grains. So I've listed a few there, like oats, quinoa, rice, sourdough breads, and soaked grains. The reason I didn't include wheat there was because wheat can be, is often highly processed. So it's one of the things that in general, in my practice, I'll try and get people to avoid, not necessarily altogether, but to just be mindful of like the quality, whether it's organic. Sourdough can make things a lot more easy to absorb in the digestive tract, whereas traditional or conventionally grown wheat can be a source of inflammation. So that's something that we want to try and minimize as far as like for our children who are already undergoing all these inflammatory or gut damaging treatments. And then soaking greens is another way to also make them more digestible and more easily absorbed. So generally want to try and minimize processed grains and refined sugars where we get, a conventional sort of diet might be getting a lot of your carbs from those types of things like sugary drinks, pop, juice, cookies, baked goods. A lot of like foods that are marketed to kids are high in carbohydrates in general. So high quality proteins. So this is really important for muscle maintenance and immune function, two things that are really important for kids who are being treated for cancer. So great sources would be lean meats, wild caught fish, free range eggs, legumes, which would be like beans, chickpeas, those kinds of things, as well as other plant-based sources. That could be like nuts and seeds, chia, hemp hearts, stuff that you can add into smoothies. So again, I talk about ideal sources. I know that groceries cost a fortune right now, but if I could just give sort of my own gold standard, I would say meat should always be grass-fed or free range and organic whenever possible. And so again, that's just when possible or within budgetary constraints to do your best. Healthy fats. So healthy fats can help to potentially reduce inflammation. They support heart, brain, and neurological health. So a lot of us might be familiar with like the idea of omega-3 fatty acids, which are often found in like fish oil supplements, but we can also get those from wild-caught fish, like salmon or other fatty fish, walnuts. Some other great oils would be like avocado, olive oil, coconut oil, grass-fed butter, nuts, and seeds. That includes like nut butters. Oops. Okay. So some other key nutritional focus areas during treatment would be anti-inflammatory foods. So this is something that I think is great for people to like Google and just, kind of like get a sense of what an anti-inflammatory food list would look like. But a lot of it would be just sort of eating like, lots of fruits and vegetables, leafy greens, olive oil, sweet potatoes, cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower. Um, Sometimes you might be referred to as like a Mediterranean style diet is often focused in those types of anti-inflammatory foods, but we just want to be trying to minimize inflammation, versus eating foods that are more processed or high in like trans fatty acids or artificial ingredients. Those can be more inflammatory in the body. So micronutrients, that would include like your vitamins and minerals. So things like antioxidants, B vitamins, and minerals like zinc support immune health. They can also support cellular repair and energy levels. So generally speaking, again, we can try to obtain these more from a whole foods diet. When I talk to kids about nutrition, I often, remind them about eating the rainbow, which essentially just means trying to, pick foods from a variety of different colors. So, a great way to incorporate your kids into like getting more interested in nutrition is to take them with you to the grocery store and maybe pick out something different. Like the other day we were at the grocery store. I can't say that we bought it, but my kids were like, "Oh, what's that?" And it was like a dragon fruit. So I just didn't know that they would eat it. But, kind of advice like that might be good to just let them have a little bit of freedom and pick out something different. And again, if your child is a really picky eater or just in a phase where eating a variety isn't an option, then a multivitamin might be helpful to just support them with those micronutrients. Another really important area during treatment is hydration. So staying well hydrated is really critical, especially if your child is experiencing things like vomiting or diarrhea, where their electrolyte balance can be thrown off. The other thing about hydration is that this is part of helping our bodies to detoxify. So we process toxins as well through our kidneys and excrete them eventually through urine. So making sure that we're just keeping hydrated is really key. Um, I do have another slide, I think, about electrolyte replacement, but I just want to comment here that I know there are some really popular ones out there that kids might be familiar with and are often in vending machines like Gatorade and Powerade, but I want to always encourage families to avoid things like food dyes or artificial colors, which, again, tend to be more inflammatory and aren't healthy. The last point that I put in there is water filtration. So this is a whole other like rabbit trail that we could probably spend a bunch of time on, but I just want people to sort of like be thinking about that. Tap water tends to contain, like while it is filtered, can still contain, traces of antibiotics and other toxins or heavy metals. So when we think about like helping our kids to minimize some of the things that they might be exposed to in the environment, a good water filtration system is something to think about. Um, and then lastly, on this slide, I have probiotics. So probiotics are beneficial bacteria that support good like gut health and digestion. Um, for the last several years, more and more people are talking about the health of our microbiome, which is, all the variety of different bacteria that live in our gut and in our bodies, and how they play a really important role. So when we take antibiotics or even with chemotherapy, there's a potential for that balance to be thrown off. In fact, we know that it is. So I know with our team, I did get some resistance with bringing up the idea of taking probiotic supplements with our oncologist. I think in some cases, there's a very small chance that if your child was like neutropenic, that taking like a live bacterial culture could potentially or theoretically cause an infection, although I would say that they're probably safe. But again, best to check with your team. And in the meantime, you can absolutely support your child's gut with fermented foods that are naturally really high in probiotics. So I have some listed there. The ones that I like to use most easily with my own children would probably be kefir, which is a fermented dairy product. So a lot of people think yogurt is really high in probiotics, and it might have some, but not quite as therapeutic as their marketing strategies might have you believe. So go for kefir. It comes in either liquid formats that's really easy to add into smoothies, or you can buy like a thicker style that is similar to just like a yogurt product. My kids also really love kombucha. We're Polish, so we eat sauerkraut now and then. But these are ways that you can, even with a small amount, like a tablespoon of sauerkraut, that would be the equivalent to taking a probiotic supplement. So getting a good variety of that is super beneficial. Okay, so I'll kind of just fly through some of these, but I wanted to list, superfoods for kids on cancer treatment. And here you'll also see I've included some of the ways that you can use these things in kid-friendly ways. So berries are great. All the different colors, they're very high in antioxidants and vitamin C. They're great fresh and on their own. We can also add frozen ones into smoothies. I find in the off season when berries aren't as available, it's more affordable to get like organic berries or wild blueberries in larger quantities frozen. And then those are great to add to smoothies, oatmeal yogurt. Leafy greens for kids, I would probably say the easiest way to get those in would be to blend them into smoothies again or add to soups. Sometimes we'll add like a handful of spinach into tomato sauce. And then I'll just like use an immersion blender just to really chop it up really finely so it's not as detectable. Because obviously green things are disgusting to young children. I'm joking, but they are, at least to mine. Cruciferous veggies. So again, we talked about that. They're also really beneficial for detoxification support. So probably our favorite way of having those would be to just roast them. We roast almost all of our veggies in this house with olive oil and sea salt. Everybody seems to appreciate a little bit of like crispy vegetables and throw those into just like as a side dish. We also do a lot of like roasted sweet potatoes and carrots, which are great. That orange color, beta carotene is great for immunity as well as digestion support. At this time of year, we do lots of soups, and sweet potatoes, carrots, butternut squash are all great for, making nice creamy soups that are easy on the digestive system and soft, hopefully won't irritate mouth sores too much. I've included ginger on the list. I know, kids don't necessarily all love the taste of strong flavors like that, but ginger is a great herb for reducing nausea and aiding digestion. So ginger can be great in a tea, either like fresh in a tea or using like a tea bag variation. And ginger would be great to add into meals. So if it fits into the dinner that you're making, just grate some in would be super helpful. So something that I've included on our superfood kids list is organ meats. So again, not something super common, specifically not in like conventional diets for kids, but more traditionally, organ meats are really rich in, traditionally were more frequently given to kids. I know almost everybody that I recommend cod liver oil to remembers someone in their childhood trying to get them to take that. And that's because liver and organ meats are really rich in minerals. They're whole food sources, so they're easy to absorb. Liver specifically is high in iron. So these things can be incorporated directly into, food, but I always find it easier to use encapsulated versions or powdered versions, and we'll sprinkle them on food or put them in smoothies. An easy one to do is like spaghetti or meat sauce. So turmeric, again, like ginger, this is something that would be great to add into dishes. If you pair it with black pepper, it is more easily absorbed, but turmeric is known as having some anti-cancer properties. It's also a very powerful anti-inflammatory and immune supportive herb. Oats and whole grains. So this is where you could get some fiber and energy boosting B vitamins. If your child's constipated, increasing fiber can be really helpful in addition to adding water. I know a lot of kids that we encountered in clinic seemed to be requiring the use of laxatives. So making sure that your kids are getting fiber is really beneficial to their system. Avocado. This is the first food I ever started all my kids on, but this is great as a healthy fat. If you're concerned about like adding calories to your child's diet and helping to just support them nutritionally from that standpoint, this is a great healthy fat to add in. Smoothies, again, toast, like mashed on avocado toast is popular around here, with a little bit of salt or seasoning. I've talked about wild salmon, but again, those omega-3s are very anti-inflammatory. Vitamin D is obviously something that we know of as an important immunomodulating vitamin. So I already chatted about the kefir being a fermented dairy product that will provide lots of probiotics, but Greek yogurt is also great compared to just, regular yogurt as far as having a much higher protein content there. There was a question that I received as well about functional mushrooms. So again, I didn't want to talk too much about this just from the perspective of medical advice and this would be more in the realm of sort of supplementation, but there's a lot of great research about functional mushrooms like turkey tail, reishi, maitake, and their use in cancer treatment, as well as alongside chemotherapy, and really helping to support the medicine that the kids are already taking. And personally, they were part of our own treatment plan, and I didn't have any issues bringing those up to our oncologist. There's a lot of great research around those that they just may not be familiar with, but that you can bring to the table just as far as getting them on side. And then bone broth. So I have a whole slide on bone broth because this would probably be my favorite one. So I saved the best for last. There are so many benefits to this food for kids and pretty much for everybody as far as gut healing, being rich in collagen, supporting gut lining. So I'll just move over to the next slide. So why this is such a great food for people undergoing chemotherapy is because it's very gentle and there's a high concentration of essential nutrients that will support healing and recovery. So bone broth is a little bit different too. I should just qualify from, like chicken broth or broth that you would buy in the store, maybe in like a Tetra Pak kind of thing. Bone broth is when you actually take the bones of like a chicken carcass or beef bones and cook them down for like about 24 hours in a slow cooker or a pot with herbs, which really helps to break down the bones and the marrow so that all of those nutrients get into the liquid and then make this really rich golden liquid that is bone broth and is super flavorful. So it's easy to digest, rich in nutrients, as I said, like collagen and gelatin, which help to repair the gut lining, which can be damaged by chemotherapy. This can also help support joint and tissue health. There's amino acids, which aid tissue repair, immune function, and reducing inflammation. And the minerals like calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and potassium are important for bone health, energy, and electrolyte balance. So you're also going to get those electrolytes, as we talked about, hydration being really important. If there's vomiting or nausea, it's really important to just, again, stay hydrated and provide the body with a good electrolyte source. Bone broth would be really soothing for mouth sores and, again, supporting bone health. So some of the medications, again, like corticosteroids can cause some potential bone mineral loss over time. So we want to these would be great foods, not just for during treatment, but ongoing after the fact. the way that we use them or use bone broth with our kids would be trying to just incorporate it in any way, shape, or form possible. Um, I was going to say, actually, I was thinking about it today that my son, when he was like on steroids, one of the things he really craved was pasta, and it would be Annie's mac and cheese. So I would always make myself feel so much better if I could cook the pasta in bone broth, all that, like, let all the liquid absorb. So I would put a small amount in, and then even make like the cheesy sauce with that, and then add some grass-fed butter. And then I would feel a lot better about the fact that like even his processed food treat was, we kind of like added some nutrition to it. So you can, as I said, you can cook pasta, rice, you could cook veggies in it, you could add it into smoothies, and then obviously it's a great base for any soup. So, and you could just drink it as well. So just a few more tips. So you want to just focus on easy to digest options for kids who are being treated for cancer. So smoothies, soups, purees, if they're younger. We use an immersion blender a lot in our household. Herbal teas and hydration. So I know we've talked a lot about hydration already, but sometimes people ask, how much water should my child be drinking throughout the day? And a general rule of thumb that I apply is for adults as well, is to drink half your body weight in ounces. So if someone's 150 pounds, they'd want to be drinking 75 ounces of water a day, which would equal to about 2.5 liters of water. So that's a good way to kind of personalize that recommendation per person. Coconut water is great. It contains natural electrolytes. It's very high in potassium. And here I've listed a few sort of better for you electrolyte brands. I know I mentioned you want to stay away from things like Gatorade and Powerade, which have a lot of sugar or artificial colors in them. So always double check, but BioSteel, Redmond Relight, Organica, and Element seem to be pretty good ones. We use a lot of herbal teas in our household. With the kids, you just want to double check, not all herbal teas are appropriate for children, but some common, very gentle ones would be ginger for nausea, as I mentioned. Chamomile is calming, so it can be calming for the nervous system, but also great for calming down like an irritated tummy. And licorice tea is different from licorice candy. It's actually really naturally sweet, so kids love it, which is great for like soothing an irritated throat. You can also drink teas cooled down. You can add some raw honey to sweeten them. You can drink them iced, just as or even make like popsicles with them, which would be a great idea for mouth sores. Also want to focus on small, frequent meals. Just even generally taking the pressure off of 3 big meals a day, like letting your child kind of like pay attention to their own hunger cues. But smaller, frequent meals makes it a little bit easier on their digestion, and also can reduce nausea by keeping their blood sugar a little more stable. And then lastly, I just wanted to also quickly touch on food storage containers and cookware. When we're dealing with a child with cancer, we want to just be trying to avoid, anything that would be carcinogenic or toxic. And so again, this would be advice I would share with anybody. But we want to avoid plastics, which can seep into foods, especially if we're using hot foods or putting warm foods into plastic containers. Don't want to use plastic to warm up your meal. Instead, try and transfer it to glass or similar, like ceramics. Stainless steel cookware, cast iron would be great. And then you want to just pay attention again to sort of like some of the cookware that has nonstick coatings that have sort of known toxic ingredients in them, like PFAS and whatnot. But again, don't want to get too detailed, but that's just something else to kind of pay attention to, as well as like your child's water container, which pretty much I've seen most kids have stainless steel nowadays, but if your child is drinking out of a plastic bottle, that might be something else to consider, is moving towards something that doesn't leach into their water. Okay, so some ingredients to be mindful of. And here I wrote, yes, I might ruin Halloween with this slide. But probably the biggest stuff that you want to be mindful of when it comes to your child is sugar and processed foods. And of course, these are the foods that our kids are exposed to with their friends at school, TV, trick-or-treating. vending machines, etc., and including in the hospital environment. They're seeing this stuff, and they like it. So I wanted to touch on glucose in cancer cells. So there's sort of this idea in the health world that sugar feeds cancer cells. So I put that in brackets because I just wanted to explain that a little bit more, to say that it's not necessarily a direct relationship that sugar would feed cancer cells, but what that is trying to say is that cancer cells, because they are rapidly dividing, they rely on glucose like all cells do as a food source. So there may be this increased uptake, and consuming too much sweet foods or excess sugar can feed into a cancerous process. So there's also a link between how high glucose intake can also create an environment conducive to cancer progression. It can also lead to obesity and inflammation. And we know that obesity and inflammation, sort of from a more metabolic perspective, increase cancer risk in general. So it's definitely something that you want to try and minimize in the diet. And I'm not saying completely, because nothing is like completely possible, but really being mindful of that, I think is really, really key as far as your child's nutrition. Also, obviously want to avoid potentially carcinogenic ingredients, which might seem obvious, but the way that our food labels and ingredients are today, this can be incredibly confusing and difficult to try and tease apart. So some of the big ones that I would say to try and avoid, which are also related to things like behavioral issues, are artificial dyes and additives like MSG. High fructose corn syrup is a bad one. As far as, again, like disrupting blood glucose and blood sugar levels. Trans fats and nitrates. Nitrates have been linked to certain types of cancers. So basically what some of these ingredients might do is cause oxidative stress or free radical damage. And oxidative stress is when our cells get damaged, and in that damage process, the DNA may also get damaged, and that's when we start to see potentially a cancerous process. The cells are no longer healthy. Something that came up a couple of years ago, actually, that I wanted to bring up just as like a highlight of, our North American food system and standards versus Europe. I know that Europe tends to have a lot more stringent food labeling rules, or, if there's a risk of a certain food or there's suspicion of something being toxic, they're a lot more stringent about removing that from their food supply. One example of this was titanium dioxide in Skittles. So this is like a food additive that just makes the colors more bright. This one was found out to be directly related to DNA damage, so a carcinogen. And unfortunately, it's still in many foods here, even though that ingredient was banned in Europe. And as part of this presentation, I just did a little bit of digging and looked into a bunch of things that were banned there and still available here. So that can be something to just look into for your own interest if you want to be really proactive about some of these things. And so just in general, again, we want to opt for more whole foods more often, watching out for processed snacks, baked goods, artificially flavored foods, candy, sugary cereals, or deep fried foods will really help to just avoid a lot of this stuff in general. And yeah, tomorrow being Halloween, yeah, it's a tough one. I have had some success in the past with Switch Witch, which is just the idea of switching out all of my child's candy for a treat the next day. But now that they're older, my older boys are 9 and 11, they're not into that. So we kind of just pick and choose, let them sort of have a few things at the first few days. And then eventually I kind of just hide it all and then pretend it never existed. So again, I know that this is some of my personal opinion, but as a naturopathic doctor and a mom, this is probably the biggest area as far as with my child in cancer treatment and now recovering from cancer treatment. These kinds of products are just a no for me. So the next bit about that would be to practice reading nutrition labels. even just like when you go to the grocery store, start taking a look or look through your own pantry at some of your nutrition labels. Some of the stuff that you want to watch out for is the added sugars, serving size. So sometimes that could be way off, what your child or yourself might actually be eating. So you may be eating a lot more than what you thought was, corresponding to the actual serving size on a package. Basically just disagreement between what we think a serving is and what the package says. Fiber, so we want to look for foods that have 3 grams or more. Protein, ideally look for things that have 5 grams or more. Try to avoid the trans fats. Sodium, want to keep that on the lower end. We've already covered artificial ingredients, but in general, kind of like when you look through the actual ingredient list, a general rule of thumb would be to avoid those long ingredient names that you just can't pronounce or don't recognize at all. They're probably best to be, not in your child's diet in any significant capacity. And then you can also look at things like vitamins and minerals. So some things have been supplemented in processed foods. A really great app that a lot of my patients are talking about, and I haven't actually tried myself, is Yuka. But you can basically just scan barcodes and it'll immediately give you a rating of what to look out for. So I just like screen grabbed that from the internet. But so there's Honey Nut Cheerios, and it's given it an 8 out of 10 or 8 out of 100. So it's bad. And then it kind of just breaks down a little bit as to like why that food like might have some red flags that you want to avoid. Yeah, but nutrition labels are a big one. And again, that's why I always come back to like whole foods. If you don't even have to read a nutrition label, then you can probably guarantee that you're avoiding that processed stuff that you don't want. Like if an apple is just an apple and an eggplant is just an eggplant. So another like nutrition tip that probably everybody has heard before is just this idea of like shopping the perimeter of the grocery store, avoiding those inner lanes as much as possible where all the boxed and processed foods tend to be, can be helpful. So again, I mentioned this at the beginning as one of the challenges, and I used a couple of examples as far as nutrient depletions from chemotherapy drugs and supplementation. So I only highlighted a few different drugs here. They all happened to be ones that my son was given during treatment. So methotrexate depletes folate, which can lead to anemia. So sometimes the folate will be monitored by your healthcare team. They'll be able to guide you on whether supplementing folate is indicated or not. It can actually interact with the medication. So we do want to be careful with supplementation during chemotherapy. Definitely don't want to antagonize or inhibit a chemo from doing its job. But at the end of chemo, is there room for supplementation, like to replenish the body? Probably yes. Vincristine, this was one that really got me particularly because I was told that vincristine to watch out for the neuropathy, if my child had trouble walking or if they were starting to develop some of that nerve pain. But we just supplemented with B6 right off the bat. And I remember talking to the residents, like, why don't we just give B6 with vincristine if we know that this can help with these side effects? And kind of not surprisingly, the oncologists didn't really know about that. So sometimes I just highlight that story because I think we can be so overwhelmed with what's going on with our kids that we're just listening and taking in information from our oncology team. Not always, and expecting that they're giving us the full scope. But if it's not part of their scope to address nutrient depletions, then that might not be information that's really forthcoming. And then corticosteroids, often used alongside chemotherapy, can deplete vitamin D, calcium, potassium, magnesium. So we know there's long-term potential risk of bone loss and osteoporosis. So again, those are areas where you can mitigate some of that with supplementation. Yeah, okay. I think that's all I wanted to say about that. And again, supplementation is almost like it is a part of nutrition and it's super important, but just in an effort to kind of keep this more around diet, we'll just move along. An NG or nasogastric tube or tube feeding. So this is sometimes required during cancer treatment to mitigate weight loss for children who aren't able to maintain adequate oral intake. They could be suffering from malnutrition, severe weight loss, or simply to just ensure adequate intake of certain nutrients and calories. So I was very fortunate, as I said, thanks to nursing. There was times where my son was basically on a hunger strike, and we were able to like probably narrowly avoid tube feeding simply because I could always fall back on that. Um, but I did want to just point out that there are options to consider if your child is in the situation of needing to be tube fed. So the hospital, I think, probably just recommends conventional pediatric nutritional formulas. I assume things like companies like Nestle that produce products that will meet essential nutritional needs, but aren't necessarily the most nutritious food in general. Sometimes you'll see if you actually read the ingredient label that while all those sort of essential nutrients are covered, the first few ingredients are things like water, sugar, and oil, or some kind of starch like maltodextrin. So when you think about that, it kind of it would leave me wanting more. Um, Same as when I guide families on selecting like a formula if they're formula feeding their newborn. So I just did a little bit of searching and I found a company which may just be American, but I'm assuming there might be ones in Canada as well. One that was called Real Food Formulas, which was like pre-made blends of food that you can actually feed through a tube. And then I found a nutritionist who fully specialized in blenderized tube feeding and had recipe books on how you can actually completely do or provide a whole foods diet, meaning you'll be able to avoid unwanted or artificial ingredients, no added sugar or preservatives, by preparing those foods at home. And so, again, I can only imagine that that would be a very overwhelming situation at the beginning if tube feeding or nasogastric tube feeding is required. But maybe if that became longer term, that those would be options that might be helpful to look into, or even just to be used in combination. And again, I just wanted to point it out as like sometimes we don't even know that these things are options for us to consider. Okay, we're almost at the end of the hour. I think I'm almost done. So just some final sort of practical tips for parents. Meal planning and prep can be a huge lifesaver. I know on a day-to-day basis, or again, long hospital days, making food for your family can be a huge challenge. Again, that's for us where like a meal train in the first few months was hugely helpful. If someone could organize that for you, or if you know a family that's in the early stages, um, and organize it for the days where you have like a clinic day. Um, that's awesome. But in general, if you can like pre-cut some fruits and veggies, keep things in the fridge, have snacks that are easy go-tos like plain Greek yogurt, which we always sweeten ourselves so we can control the sugar with either maple syrup or raw honey. Cheese, dips like hummus, meat sticks are good go-tos. And then, you're probably going to need some prepackaged stuff. So go to the store, do that, Yuka app, or do some research on having some stuff that you feel really good about as far as like the ingredient list, but it's easy to just like grab and go and have with you in your bag for a day out. Batch cooking is also super helpful if you have time, or again, can have people bring meals like one pot meals or lasagnas or chilies, and ask them to just try and like hide things in there as far as veggies are concerned. Um, Collaboration with healthcare partners. So creating a balanced nutrition plan. This is really sort of the basis of this whole talk is to have these things like in consideration. Um, if in my opinion, we don't just want our kids to be fed, we really want to just make sure that the food that they're eating is as nutritious as possible so that we're giving their body a better chance at responding to their medicine as well as healing and thriving through this whole process. I think it's important to explore outside of the hospital staff for other opinions, whether that's a naturopathic doctor, holistic nutritionist, just to get some other ideas. And then ultimately to ask questions to your own team, and advocate for your child, I think is is one of the hardest things that we as parents have to learn. I know it took me a while to kind of find my feet. After the first few months, I was sort of like, okay, this is, I sort of, again, have figured out what's happening a little bit. And then I felt in a better place to like actually ask questions about our treatment plan, or, maybe challenge certain things, especially when it comes to supplements or maybe things that you want to bring in that aren't part of, the conventional oncology approach. Involving your kids is really helpful in getting them interested in food, making it fun for them, encourage participation in their food choices, whether you take them to the grocery store or let them sort of like, make decisions, or just give them two options, two healthy options, let them pick between the two. That's, again, a toddler strategy that I use. Be patient, following treatment. So a couple of you had asked questions about, food preferences after treatment, and how to manage sort of picky eating, or foods that they may have previously liked but now don't want to try. We could talk a little bit more about that and specific strategies, but I think one of the biggest things is just really, being patient with them. And then work on healthy swaps and build on favorite foods that your kids already have. So like the story of the Annies, I kind of feel like this is a strategy I often work with families in general, is like, tell me your kids' favorite foods, and I will find a way that we can like try and make that healthier. If they like chicken fingers, well, how can we like maybe make those chicken fingers instead of like frozen from a box? How can we like make that recipe healthier and like hide some stuff in the batter, maybe just to or maybe reduce the salt or whatever it is, just to try and like, again, build on things that your child already likes and slowly kind of work them to building on their variety, or again, just fully hiding things in their food. Okay, so some final takeaways. I just wanted to acknowledge one more time that caregiving for a sick child can be, and actually is, very overwhelming, but eating well can be made to be more simple. Nutrition is key to supporting recovery and overall well-being. So this is an area that I think, again, I can't drive home enough how important it is. And it can just be small, consistent changes that make a big difference in the long run. Definitely give yourself and your child a lot of grace. There were so many moments in our journey where I just like couldn't even believe where we were, that like whether Spencer wasn't eating or all he wanted was salt and vinegar chips. And I was just like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing right now. So again, this isn't about perfection or not being realistic about where you're at. This is a very difficult process. So I think we all just have to, again, give ourselves grace going through this. And that's where building a team can be really helpful. So as I mentioned, seeking out other professionals who can support you. Some other ones that I didn't mention, but can be really beneficial for just managing your child's overall health in like their actual like structural health, can be osteopath, can be really helpful for their digestive system. Chiropractors, craniosacral is amazing for kids. OT can be really helpful. So that's occupational therapy, especially for things like texture issues or feeding issues later on. And then seek out online resources or groups like OPAC, like this, to get support. And so I just want to encourage you to take action after today. Maybe there's one or two things that stuck out to you, and make an effort to try and incorporate those in the next week or so. And again, just remember, here was a quote that I found: you don't have to be perfect, just be a loving presence one day at a time. Oh gosh, I'm gonna make myself cry. Because again, this isn't about perfection. It's really just about being an amazing support as a parent or caregiver to your child. And that's really what's going to, get them through day by day. So thank you. And I do have some time for Q&A, I think, as long as Sarai says I do. And yeah, that was Spencer today.
Thank you so much, Jackie. That was very good presentation, very excellent. Lots of great information. And I know we do have some questions here, so we'll just jump right in
Okay.
from the people who are right here, the attendees. I'm just looking through their questions. So the first question comes from Marta. Are baked goods with honey or maple syrup recommended?
Those are definitely the sweeteners that I rely on if we are making homemade baked goods. So like whether it's muffins or like a banana bread, I'll try and use, like the natural sweetness from the fruit, but I'll look for recipes that call for those just because they're more natural. They tend to like, while they still have sugar in them, of course, they haven't been as processed or stripped of like their minerals and nutrients. So they're definitely more beneficial.
Mhm. Great. Sarah had a question. Is there a multivitamin that you can suggest?
That's a good question. Without like necessarily calling out any specific brand, I try to like avoid gummies most of the time. I find that they just like, as much as I try to find one that is like good as far as like the ingredient list and if they're kind of covering a decent amount of nutrients, they're sort of harder to come by. So I often stick with the professional brands. If you work with a naturopath or a holistic nutritionist, they'll probably point you more in the direction of those versus just grabbing something off the shelf from like the drugstore. And just in general, I would sort of say avoid drugstore supplements in general. Like supplements are not all created equal. There's such a huge range in quality, which might even include sort of like some of the fillers or artificial colors. You can kind of run into some of those issues there too. So I'll often use things like powders. Like there are some good multivitamin powders. NFH is a Canadian company that I'll often look at. So
Mhm.
yeah, hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Sarah also asked, is a reverse osmosis filter okay for water filtration?
Yeah. So there's so water filtration is like a hugely controversial topic, I would say. There's lots of different sort of like philosophies on that. I think you just have to be aware of like the different limitations, like reverse osmosis, as far as I know, kind of like removes, and maybe I'm getting confused with distillation, but some of the water filtration systems like will almost remove everything from water. And then it's almost on you to then reestablish like a good balance. So you might want to be putting in some of the trace minerals back into your water if you're using something like reverse osmosis or a distiller. Yeah.
Francis was asking, do you think fermented foods are okay for a post-transplant low bacteria diet?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the case, so like I said, in that one like kind of theoretical example where I remember debating with our oncologist about probiotics, and they were saying that like probiotics could theoretically cause an infection because they are um live in most products. The only way, like my own logical brain was like, well, that only really makes sense to me if my child is severely neutropenic, which many times he was. So in your child's case, like post-transplant, being on immunosuppressants, I don't know the answer to that question simply because like I don't really know. Like I would maybe use neutrophil count as a guideline for whether you feel comfortable. But that being said, with fermented foods, as I mentioned, being a little bit different from probiotics, um, because it's a food, your stomach acid, like if the stomach acid is normal, usually a lot of that, like the HCl would neutralize a lot of the bacteria. Um, Whereas a probiotic supplement, if it's like enteric coated and sort of meant to be able to bypass the stomach in order to get to where it needs to go in the gut, that might be a little bit different. So that's a good question, Francis. And hi. I know, Francis.
Okay. Sid was asking, do you recommend IV high dose vitamin C? And what dose do you recommend of vitamin C?
So, because I don't do IV therapy in my own office, I don't know the specifics around dose, but the reason IV like infusions for vitamin C are super beneficial for cancer patients. Again, I don't know the dose, but the reason that you would want to be doing IV infusions is because with oral vitamin C, you reach a tolerance level there. So by doing an IV, you can bypass that and get to much higher doses that are then able to work on the cancer. So I apologize. I don't know the specific answer on the dose, but I think you could do it with children for sure.
Sarah asks, what's your take on red light therapy for kids?
That's a good question. I just got a red light. I have been hearing a lot of great things. There's a program that I follow out of, I guess she's in Mexico now, but Susan Johnson. She's a really great person to follow. She has a podcast called Thrive Through Cancer, and her son also went through leukemia treatment. But I was recently listening to a podcast on sort of the benefits of red light. And essentially, I think the idea is that like it's supporting mitochondrial health and it's anti-inflammatory. So we never used one during treatment. It wasn't really on my radar. And also, even though we just have one, I'm not 100% sure how to get my toddler to sit still and wear the little sunglasses to use it. But it is my plan to use that to support him in recovery as just like another modality to, keep him healthy, keep his cells healthy. And I'm going to use it on my face for collagen production.
There is a question here that was received as well about, oh, so, hold on, sorry. Marta said, what was that name and podcast again?
So she's a functional nutritionist. Her name is Susan Johnson. Her program is called Thrive Through Cancer. And she's also got a really great, her son was named Kicker, but she's got a website called Kick Cancer. You can like just Google this, or it's probably all on her website, but she has like lists of like a toolkit to kind of like get you started on thinking about nutrition, or just all these like additional modalities and to get more information. Yeah, Susan Johnson.
Thanks. What about after treatment nutrients for healing post chemo? Excuse me.
Yeah, so I think everything that we kind of covered regarding like during treatment would be the exact same following treatment. Kind of this idea that like you want to just create an environment where cancer can't exist. And so you want to just sort of like be providing a really, and as I say that, I find that frustrating at the same time because I don't know how my child got cancer. As a naturopath, that was probably one of my most shocking real like things I had to come to terms with. So am I getting myself off track? Yes, I am. Essentially, basically everything we covered, I think, is what's important for maintaining a good nutrition and nutrient dense foods.
Okay, thanks. Leanne says, can OT be used for food texture sensitivities? What's OT?
Yeah. OT is occupational therapy.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. But definitely you'd want to work with like a pediatric occupational therapist. And I think the other thing that might be helpful could be speech and language pathologist. They might have some like some benefit with regards to like oral or textural issues. So I would just like do a little bit of like investigating and maybe do some like free consults with practitioners to see if they specify in what your concern is.
Yeah, because I know we had this question there in advance. I know you touched on some of that about strategies to help kids overcome how they feel about their former favorite foods, which now don't taste as good, or the texture is causing negative feelings, strategies and things like that for that, to make them like the food again.
Yeah, that is a good one. um, well, I mean, I don't have anything like earth shattering or groundbreaking. I think it's like, yeah, being super patient is probably the hardest one. You want to make sure meal times are really like low stress, that you're not putting pressure on the foods. Because I think with kids that like backfires more often than not. You want to probably make changes like really slowly, kind of approach food from maybe like more of like a sensory experiment more so than even eating it, just to kind of like reintroduce the foods. Um, Again, that's not really like my area of like expertise as far as like strategizing. But yeah, maybe like you could even tell me what the food is, like if it's something that would help me maybe be more specific, like if there is, yeah, more context. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think you just have to be patient.
Mhm. Sarah was asking, how would a chiropractor and osteopath help post-treatment?
So chiropractic works sort of based on like your nervous system being in alignment in order for organ function to happen smoothly, or like, yeah. So basically like ensuring that like spinal alignment allows for nerves to then travel to every different type of tissue. So it's not just for pain, it can also be for organ function. So I think like in our experience, like we see a chiro and an osteo. We see chiro for more like actual manipulations and adjustments. But they've been really beneficial for anytime we've seen constipation. Um, I know for my son who's had so many lumbar punctures done, there's so much tension in his low back and sacral area. So we've kind of like, we go back and forth between osteo, which does more soft tissue manipulation and organ work, and chiropractor, kind of just depending. Like, I don't know, I guess I go by intuition is who I want to see. But both of those things are really about optimizing like structure to allow for function. Yeah.
Okay, great. So just a couple more questions. One was about a child who doesn't like any sort of non-packaged fruit. She doesn't like fruit at all unless it's an applesauce or some kind of processed version, nothing raw. How do you help a child like that? Maybe like more fresh fruits, raw fruits.
Yeah. So if they like the format of like a pouch or processed food, like an applesauce thing, then I would probably start with something like smoothies or purees, but making them on your own. Almost kind of going back to like making your own homemade baby food. Um, might just be, and even like I did this with my kids, this might sound weird, but at the time with my first, I was really anal, let's say, about everything that he ate, which I've since loosened up, but he really wanted yogurt drinks. And I was like, no, you're not going to have yogurt drinks. They're too sweet. So I bought yogurt drinks. I dumped them all out and I filled every bottle with kefir, or like a smoothie basically. And then I told him he could have the yogurt drinks. So I'm not above literally tricking my child. So if they want something processed, like make them kind of like let them think that they're having that, not lying to them, but just sort of like working with their preference to just get them to like build their confidence with trying something. And then maybe they will sort of eventually get there as far as, fresh fruit. But again, there's so many ways that you could consume fruit. I would even just like try and get creative, like baking it into things. Again, like applesauce or um, like banana bread, zucchini breads. There was a book by Jessica Seinfeld from so many years ago called Deceptively Delicious. And the entire premise of it was like how to hide, fruits and vegetables into recipes so that your child isn't even aware. And then just like, yeah, just keep trying to offer, I think is the strategy, but without pressure.
Mm, sounds
Hopefully
great.
that helps.
And the last question was about any food suggestions for neuroendocrine tumor patients. What kind of foods should be avoided specifically for neuroendocrine tumors?
Yeah. Well, without really having like specific knowledge of a neuroendocrine tumor in general, I would be thinking about just like the type of advice I would give to people about hormone balance. Um, I think, the one point I made about like food containers and plastics, in our environment right now, we're sort of like bombarded by chemicals that can impact our neuroendocrine system or endocrine system specifically. So whether things are acting like estrogens, like there's xenoestrogens from, fragrance or phthalates, like I think what I would want to be doing is just trying to minimize or do like a really low tox lifestyle in general. just to try and, avoid anything that could potentially like impact hormones any further. But
Okay,
that's
great.
again, that's sort of a best guess, not necessarily specific to the child's tumor.
All right, great. Well, everybody's saying thank you, Jackie. This has been a great session. I agree. It's been very wonderful and informative. And I know a couple people were asking, will this recording be available? Yes, it will. So I'll put it up on our YouTube channel tomorrow, and I'll put it up. The link will be on our social media and on our weekly newsletter, or bi-weekly rather, newsletter that's going out this Friday. It'll be on there as well. So you can all view it and review it as well. Yeah, so make sure you check out drjackie.ca. That's Dr. Jackie's website, and opac.org for OPAC's resources, program supports as well. And yeah, if I guess if they have any more questions, is it okay to contact you after if somebody thinks of anything
Yeah,
else, or to contact
absolutely.
you through the website?
I work virtually, so I can work with anyone who's in Ontario. I'm also pretty open about our journey on Instagram, so anybody who wants to follow me there, Dr. Jackie ND, um, yeah, and or find me online. I am
Great.
available.
Great, thank you. And just a final comment here from Jen and Jer. This was so very helpful. All the best to you, Jackie, too, with you and your son's journey. My son gets his poured out on the 13th. That's great.
Great.
Thank you for sharing that. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Like I said, this will be up on our YouTube tomorrow. I'll share the links. And yeah, have a good night. Have a safe and happy Halloween for those who celebrate tomorrow. And take some of Dr. Jackie's advice on some of those candies and sugars. So take care and have a good evening. Thank you again, Jackie. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.